Namaste and welcome to our continuing series, Evenings with Sraddhalu. We are continuing the theme of current affairs. Particularly this time, I would like to complete some of the pending questions. And before we proceed, I want to remind our viewers that the topic of current affairs necessarily will be controversial. Inevitably, we will touch issues which evoke strong emotions, where there are strong sides. Our intention is not so much to take sides, but to view issues from a deeper evolutionary perspective. As a consequence, one may end up choosing a side sometimes, but not always. And even when choosing a side, one would make a distinction between what of that side is relevant to the evolution and what might not be, what might even be contrary. To give an example from Sri Aurobindo himself, he observes that when the Second World War began, initially he did not take sides, because these were, after all, global powers at that time based in Europe, colonial powers, fighting each other over colonial interests primarily, about how they were dividing the world among themselves. But then at one point, it was clear that one of the sides had taken an Asuric turn, which, if it won, would severely set back human evolution. And that's when he took a side. In taking the side of the allied powers, it was not as if they were all perfect and good in everything they said or did. They had their own flaws, they had their own limitations. Even Churchill, that he found to be such a good instrument, had his own flaws, had his own peculiarities and even perversions from a certain point of view. So one has to keep this larger picture in mind and not get too carried away in these discussions. I've also chosen consciously to take up this topic because if we do not bring into the ambit of our spiritual understanding and evolution some of these issues, we will never be able to see through them or put them in the right perspective from or integrate them with our own sadhana or the spiritual perspective of human evolution. Necessarily, one would be attacked for stating things when it does not align with certain interests. There are on the internet, we are in an open space. Anybody can say anything and pretty much get away with it. These are often, they're referred to as trolls. Their job is to provoke you or to distract or taunt or ridicule in some way. And inevitably, we will have a few off and on. As far as possible, I ignore these. And occasionally I have to take them on also in response, but I avoid mostly because it serves not much purpose. I have chosen also to take certain issues which are controversial because it is necessary. And by facing them, we can move forward rather than be stuck with sometimes a politically correct posture, but which does not help because it leaves you ambiguous, confused, where in fact clarity and even taking a side may be necessary. So this I give as a background, and already I think there is one of the trolls who's on, and if it gets too messy, then we simply block the person if needed. But this will happen, and I would rather ignore this. And for those of you who are on the chat box, you can ask the moderator to block them or simply ignore them. This is the better way. So with this background, I would like to move ahead with some of the pending questions which have been for the last few weeks, and some of them are have been touched before, but I think it is worthwhile to re-engage with them because there might be many new viewers who might not have seen all the earlier discussions. We are now in a number 253. So the first email I have is the message which was in the chat box last time is from Pramod, when I had mentioned Tagore's poem becoming the national anthem, and which was also used earlier in praise of King George V. And so Pramod wrote in the chat box, respectfully, the national anthem written for English King is a canard which has been debunked time and again. The Jana Gana Mana Adhinayak being referred to is Krishna himself. Tagore's version was therefore truncated by the secular brigade before being adopted as national anthem. Tagore may have been imperfect like all men, but he was not a British stooge. You of all people must have read Tagore's salutations to Sri Aurobindo. So yes, the point though is, no point did I say that Tagore was a British stooge or that he was not loyal to national interest. It's a fact that when the song was written, he was asked to write something for the occasion of King George V, and he wrote it for that occasion, but in his own mind he says he kept before him the idea of God to whom he addresses this, who is the creator of India's destiny. That does not change the fact that the song was written for that occasion and was used for that occasion. And so that was my point. And the question is then, is that song appropriate to be taken as a national anthem? Or was it better than Vandemataram? So this question had been raised before also, and for Pramod I would suggest that you look at the more detailed discussion that I already had in the Evenings with Sraddhalu series, episode 189, approximately from 10.5 minutes onwards till the 27th minute. There is this discussion quite in detail. I have studied the whole matter in great detail. I have also quoted precisely the letter that you have referenced, 1937, that where he says that it was addressed to God. But then there is also his description of what happens. He was approached by a friend who was the go-between him and the British government, and the friend proposed to him on behalf of the government that he write a song for that occasion. It was sung on that occasion. The newspapers of the time openly declared it was written and sung in praise of the king. But Tagore himself writes, because for him it created both a thrill of excitement because it was a great honor, but also an internal conflict. So he wrote it in a way which had dual use or dual meaning. It was addressed to God, and yet it could be used on that occasion without explicitly stating it is addressed to God, in which case it would not have been used for that occasion. So I've given the whole detail there. I don't want to go too much into it. I've also mentioned, because I would be repeating myself, I've also mentioned there that the original proposal for the song to be used as a national anthem was made in 1942 by, at that time, the great freedom fighter Subhash Chandra Bose. 1937 he proposed that this should be made the national anthem. Subhash Chandra Bose himself aligned with Hitler because he thought that would be an alliance which would be useful against the British. But at no point do we say he was not a patriot. So you have to understand the context in which these events took place. And what is also not known is this song, Jana Gana Mana, was played in 1942 in Hamburg, in then Nazi Germany, as a precursor for it to become India's national anthem. So if you want to really put it hard, you will say it was blessed by the Nazi leadership to be made India's national anthem. And then eventually it was chosen to be the national anthem. So if you really go back into all these complexities, it can be quite messy. So what I'm trying to show you is the fact remains. It was written for the occasion, it was used for the occasion, and it was declared as such. In Tagore's mind, it was seen, because it had dual use, he addressed it to God. Nevertheless, it was written for the occasion. So my point in stating this was that it is not the most appropriate as national anthem. There are many great songs one could have selected. There is more that I have described, which you can go back to that particular episode without my needing to repeat it all. But this is an example of a lot of issues which can be emotionally troublesome for people, and yet the reality should be understood in the context of the age and not from a hindsight of today's values. If you look at Subhash Chandra Bose aligning with Hitler, or even Veer Savarkar praising Hitler at that point because Hitler was fighting the British, it does not make them less patriots. So depending on which side you are on, you can use these facts to criticize and review history. The fact is, at that time, there were so many freedom fighters who thought Hitler was actually a useful ally because he could help India get free from the British. It's only because Sri Aurobindo gave us a deeper spiritual insight of Hitler being an Asuric or being guided by an Asuric force, that during the Second World War, the people in the ashram or people under Sri Aurobindo's influence could take a stand against the Axis powers. Even then, there were those in the ashram who were still in two minds, despite Sri Aurobindo's statement. And so it goes into a very interesting dimension. There was an incident, in fact, which was narrated to us by, I think it was perhaps Dyuman Bhai narrated, that in some corner of the ashram main building, at the time, during the Second World War, and at that time nobody knew of the other side of the Nazi excesses against the Jewish people, etc. So there were two people who were arguing, two of the ashramites. One of them was taking a very firm stand for Hitler. It led to a certain altercation. And you must understand, the ashram at that point was intensely in a protection of a spiritual atmosphere. That disruption in the atmosphere, mother detected from her room. She came down from her room, went to the terrace, which was above Dyuman Bhai's room. From there, she was staring at these two fiercely, saying nothing, just intensely staring. Obviously, she was sensing the force behind and acting on the force. The two people calmed down at some point, they saw the mother and they stopped. There were other events where they clearly stated, Sri Aurobindo and the mother clearly stated why it was that they had taken a stand for the Allied powers, and it had to do with this spiritual and occult dimension. So I'm putting these things in context. They are inconvenient, but we have to face it, and it does not at any point lead you to question the loyalty either of Tagore or Subhash Chandra Bose or Savarkar or others. These were great stalwarts, and there are other details I have spoken of in that particular episode you can look at. So I will proceed from there to the same topic on the Vandemataram mantra. Vaijayanti has asked, in the last episode you commented that we should bring back Vandemataram mantra. Please discuss what are the possible ways to it. Suppose, for example, now she is proposing, while attending our day-to-day phone calls, we greet the person on the other end by saying hello. If we are who are willing to replace that greeting style with Vandemataram, will it make an impact on the consciousness, on the conscious or subconscious level of people? Is this and other such types of ways, could they be looked upon as meaningful and valid ways to follow? Second, when and how are we as a nation going to switch from the imposed name India to its original name Bharat? It's well and good if prominent figures such as Modi and Yogi Adityanath, who impact society on a large scale, take any steps towards it. But until then, what is one supposed to do? In this context, she writes, what should be our stand upon Shakespeare's quote, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet." It's an important point, and I want to share what I think, and it's purely my estimate on this issue. From a spiritual perspective, the way you greet, the names you use, the words have a power. They have an effect. How deep? Sometimes can be a moot point. Sometimes it can make a huge difference, other times it may be nominal. When we greet each other particularly, if it is done with an intention it can have a massive effect. The mother speaks of this. When you greet somebody and you simply say hello, casual, how are you, and you don't mean anything, it may have no effect. But if you actually genuinely say, I wish you well, with feeling, it's a force that goes. It affects. And it can gather and build. On occasions of birthdays, when you receive greetings from people, if you're conscious, you will notice, almost as if in your aura, in your consciousness, little pings of connections coming in. Someone sends, poop, 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 like little touches. And occasionally there's something very warm and full. And you say, oh, who is this from? If you're conscious, you can notice how it builds in you or on you or around you a certain gathered force quality, depending on the way these greetings are expressed. And sometimes when it's just casually done, you feel it. It is hollow, empty. But it's there momentarily and it fizzles out. And you know it will fizzle out in a few hours or in a day. When it is expressed with feeling, you can feel something, it might last. It can even stay with you weeks or more. So a lot depends on what is behind, and the word form used can be a symbolic representation of it. When Auroville had been inaugurated, in the first few years, my teacher MP Pandit was asked by the mother to give talks near the site of the Matri Mandir, at the site of the Matri Mandir, to give talks on the synthesis of yoga. The idea being that people who are working there would align to the practice of the integral yoga in their work. So often he would be going at least once a week. I don't know how many times. Sometimes it was more. But when he was going there, often he became the go-between for questions from Aurovillians. And he has documented, I think, all the questions that he could, all the major questions are documented in his talks during that time, during the talks of the synthesis of yoga itself. And those are published now. So in one occasion, somebody asked the mother, what should be the greeting of Aurovillians meeting Aurovillians? And the mother's reply was, truth. So when you meet each other, you say, truth. You'll see around the banyan tree, there is the message that's again the mother had given for putting at the service of truth. In 3 languages it's placed there. This thing she thought important enough that as a greeting would be a reminder of why we are here, what it is that we serve. In the same way, when she started or she blessed some of the early businesses in Pondicherry, all of them she named honesty. So there is honesty, electricals, honesty, maison honesty, honesty society, all honesty. Not much variety, you might say. But it was to bring that intention. When your business is named honesty, you can't be compromising, isn't it? And so the names do carry a power when held with that intention. And when mother gave it as a blessing, then of course it had a certain force. So when you say Bharat or you say India, often the intention behind would be there, but also there will be the form and the force of what is traditionally known in India itself. So what happens in practice for the Indian people when you speak in vernacular languages, you always say Bharat. You never say India. But if you have grown up with the English language, then you say India, and then when you switch to the vernacular, you switch to Bharat, but sometimes you feel too odd and then you might repeat India also. So in the Constitution of India, we the people of India, that is Bharat. So you put India first and then we say India, that is Bharat. So you identify because that's the reality which we have renamed as India. And yes, these things can make a difference. When you greet, traditionally in India, you greet with a spiritual greeting. Namaste is a spiritual greeting. I bow to thee, I bow to the divine presence within you. It reminds you that you are meeting the divine presence within primarily. Reminds you, you too are a divine presence within. You may not be conscious on the surface. But there are other spaces where they will greet with Ram Ram or Jai Siya Ram victory to Sita and Rama, or just Ram Ram. And variations. Jai Shri Krishna would be one of the common greetings among devotees of Shri Krishna. So, when you repeat that, it makes a difference. It elevates immediately the atmosphere, the interaction, the engagement you have. And if you do it with feeling, it can be quite powerful. So if you said Vandemataram, with the same way, yes, it can be a huge force. My suggestion, and it was very embarrassing in one of the schools where I had spoken about this, and I just gave that as an example. I said, look, how the mentality of the slave still retains symbols. And I gave this example of Janagana Mana. And immediately after my talk, they were supposed to play the national anthem. And the students were going to do that, and they were looking awkwardly. And I said, yes, it is a national anthem, so you have to sing it. But you can end it with Vandemataram. So there are ways you might find in which you accept this, it's a symbol, finally, and then you end it with a Vandemataram. You might greet yourself with Vandemataram also. Greet among friends and Vandemataram. It's interesting also, I want to place this on record, in the ashram physical education programs, where, for example, what is called the 2nd December program, which is on the occasion of the school's anniversary, the program begins with all the participants doing a march past before the mother, then standing together in assembly, and all together singing Vandemataram. The program ends with the national anthem, Janagana Mana, played by the orchestra. Everyone stands, nobody sings. It's just been like that. Who chose to do it this way, at what stage, it's not even my concern, but I find it very symbolic that on some level, at least here in this space, the Vandemataram is given the value of a national anthem. And the other, which is formally the national anthem, and it is, you can't help it, that's the reality, is given its due respect also. So I find Vaijayanti's questions to be important. The suggestion is important, and I would suggest, if you feel like it, do that. Why not greet people with Vandemataram? I have done that on occasion in certain spaces where a public lecture on a theme which had a strong force, especially for the young people, for their future or for nation building, to end it with a formal Vandemataram with all together. And it has a huge force, it has a huge power and a spiritual content to it. And yes, this can be done. The next question is from Luke. It's more a comment actually, but it's important. He says, you mentioned the 4 auto pens used during Biden's presidency. I have recently discovered that in France, François Mitterrand, who was a socialist and president from 1981 to 1995, had granted to Jacques Attali, a Jewish presidential counselor and Freemason like him, the power of the presidential signature. Apparently, Jacques Attali was a higher ranked Freemason than him, and François Mitterrand was his popular puppet that people liked to naively call uncle, tonton. It is time to understand who really and deeply governs so many of our so-called democracies, and for which non-friendly agendas. So it's more a comment. I find this interesting. I wouldn't be surprised. I do not know if there is any way to validate. Surely Luke has done his research. But it aligns perfectly with the discussion that we had right at the beginning of this series, when I had spoken of the cabal and the underlying framework with which they perpetuate themselves among the rich, the powerful, and the charismatic. By entering into elite universities or other institutions and engaging through secret societies to form interest groups which then are manipulated to be led or controlled by various ways. So if that was the case, yes, it's very likely, and I wouldn't be at all surprised. Among them though, they would have a certain trust, a certain friendship, that it would not be misused, a certain loyalty even. And this is where we have a problem, whether that loyalty overrides loyalty to the nation. Which loyalty stands? I don't know. If in this case the national loyalty was shared by both, while we would still say it was illegal, but perhaps it was all right, passable, acceptable perhaps, if it was done quietly. But if the loyalties were compromised, national loyalties were compromised to these other loyalties, then it is a very serious problem. Which one is it? We had recently in India this question which popped up in a strange way. You might have been watching that recently Shashi Tharoor, who is in the Congress party, has been under pressure from the party itself. And at one point he was asked this question, why is it that you have this pressure? So he said, I have to make a choice between national interest and party interest, and I choose to place national interest before party interest. That statement, it's interestingly, rankled a lot of people in the party. And many seniors in the party came out with a statement saying that Shashi Tharoor is not one of us anymore. Why? Because he places national interest above party interest. Interesting. And they actually say it publicly. So to me that is a serious problem. That's a serious conflict. And if Shashi genuinely believes this and places national interest before party interest, I would respect him, irrespective of what party he is in. And to me, the party is irrelevant. As long as all parties are interested in national interest, whatever their differences of ideology, they don't matter. They are even useful because they align for national interest. It is when parties place party interest or ideology interest over national interest that you have the problems, and that's where we are criticizing them or would point them out as serious issues. I'm going to briefly look at the chat box. I would like to finish this theme for today if possible, because I have some other themes which are pending which will be very important for us to take up. Yes, Mahesh Narayan says today is Kargil Vijay Divas. My gratitude to our valorous heroes who made supreme sacrifices to make this victory happen. This is the day when the victory in the Kargil war was won. So yes, it has a great symbolic value, and it's good for you to acknowledge the sacrifices made by your ancestors that give you the freedom that you have. This is extremely important. Sri Aurobindo points to this as one of the requirements which makes a civilization great, is that they acknowledge the efforts and sacrifices of their ancestors. Where that is not there, what you've received from your ancestors is to trifle. You do not value it enough to protect it, and you can lose it. So this recognition of the sacrifices is important. Nevertheless, I'm going to take a larger position. It is Kargil war, where there was a conflict with the Pakistani army. You take a step above the national identity, and on the other side in Pakistan, it's also a day of loss, where they lost the war. Interesting. You take a step above where other nations are involved, and it may be just one more symbolic gesture or day. So you see how something very important for a certain level, for a certain context, for a certain group identity can become contrary or fade out in importance as you widen the scope. It does not make it less important for the group at its level. If children do not realize the enormous suffering and sacrifices made by the millions who fought to make India free, or before that, the millions who fought through various stages of great historic events to protect civilizational values, you will never have the strength or the courage to stand for them. I'll put this in a certain way which will highlight the importance of this. There's a saying in the business community that every human being has a price. If you are paid enough, eventually you will break and accept whatever it is that the person is offering you. So someone says, hey, I'm going to pay you 100 rupees, $100, whatever currency you use. Will you please do this for me? You may say, no, that's below my dignity. Maybe. He said, I'll pay you 1,000. Where's your dignity now? I pay you 10,000. At some point you're going to say, all right, I will do it. For that much, I don't mind going below my dignity. Change the context slightly. Make it, will you commit a small crime? Go and break the glass of that other person's house. It's a crime, but it's small, petty crime, and you can get away with it easily if you're a little careful. So maybe the price goes up 10,000, 100,000, whatever. At some point you'll say, okay, it's worth it. And maybe I'll spend some of that money to repay the person to fix the glass. There are many ways you'll justify it yourself. Take a bigger crime. Take a moral crime, ethical crime, and see at what point you break financially. On the number, 100,000, a million, 10 million, 100 million, a billion. You see the way the temptation works. You're going to get $1 billion, rupees, whatever, for doing whatever it is. At what point would you break? So the reply to this, I will place in this way. If my parents were petty thieves who went to jail for stealing or for lying or cheating somebody, my identity now is aligned to that, I'll say, okay, not a big deal, I'll break soon enough. If my parents and ancestors went to jail, suffered, died, were guillotined, were killed in the most gruesome manner because they stood for and fought for the freedom of the civilization, of the race, of the people, of the nation, and did not compromise, my identity would be that much more difficult to break. You see how this works? That's why it is so important that our young should be told the stories of heroism, of courage, of achievement, of valor, of even suffering and pain and struggle that your civilizational builders have gone through. In the United States, this used to be very well known because the US identity, it's interesting to study because it's recent. It's a very young country. So the identity was they said founding fathers who fought for freedom and etc. It's relatively a few hundred years ago. And the founding fathers. And I found it so weird that in India, and it is often in the leftist space, that they would refer to India's founding fathers. Who wrote the Constitution? They're replicating the American model. Constitution writers were founding fathers. Oh, your Constitution writers are founding fathers. They have absolutely no value to the common Indian as founders of your civilization or your nation. Absolutely none. You don't accept them as founding fathers. Mahatma Gandhi was called by them father of the nation. No, doesn't fit at all. The national identity goes way back and it's much more deeply rooted in those who fought to unify India and to protect India and the civilizational values. But if you don't know anything about them, and then from your childhood you are told, oh, Gandhiji one day got up and said, quit India and the British left. Oh, what a great man. With non-violence he freed India, which is a fiction, which is not true by the way at all. Then you do not value the freedom. It was so easy. He got up and said quit and they quit. I can get up and say quit and they would quit. What's the big deal? You were never told the actual suffering and struggle with which they were driven out. And it's only when they were just about to leave, already they were on the negotiating table, that he said quit India. So he really did nothing. He just took advantage of an occasion. And so you have absolutely no value for the freedom that you've been given. That's why it's so important to know these things, to know these stories. So again, Kargil, yes, it's an important point. And we have to respect the supreme sacrifices. And because we respect the people out there on the border who are willing to die to protect you so that you can be free, will be willing to die and make that sacrifice. Because we respect, because they know that we value them. And this is important. but also put it in the bigger context of what has brought us to this point and given us those civilizational values by which they became heroic and could stand for, what were they fighting for or protecting. So it's just putting it in context. Khyati is saying that nowadays there are a lot of people suffering from mental health disorders. We see that in a lot of patients in the OPD. Can you say something about this problem in the Mother's Light? Yes, and I'm going to put it in context of what we have been discussing so far. In 1992 end, when this war started in the US invaded basically Iraq and overthrew Saddam Hussein, my teacher MP Pandit, he made this observation. He said from the point that things started, you could feel in the atmosphere a huge disturbance. And he made a comment about how a lot of accidents and little issues were happening because there was this disturbance in the collective consciousness of humanity. Because right now, at that moment, there are literally thousands, perhaps lakhs, approaching 1 million perhaps, people struggling, dying in some of the most gruesome ways in the middle of the war. And it creates a ripple in the collective consciousness. It impacts us on levels where we are not conscious. You'll find yourself getting distracted, confused, because that stress of their suffering is affecting and stressing you on some level you're not aware of. Sometimes it is picked up more easily when you're asleep in dream state, or generally in that state when you're more open to a universal wider consciousness and are susceptible to influences on the subtle level. When you're awake, you're too crude and gross and hardened on the surface to feel anything. But it also triggers, because of that, indirectly, accidents and other little problems. So it's a fact that there is such an impact on a collective level of such events. But if you look at what has been happening, generally speaking, there's a kind of a war which is not quite that, where you blow up people, blow up spaces. For that also is happening. Right now there are millions of people suffering. But there's a different kind of war which is a psychological stress of war. There's also war which is, I won't use the word war, I'll say, there's a kind of a disturbance of the same grade of consciousness, of a psychological, crude, vital, emotional disturbance, which is being spread through social media. Through a media that at any point you pick up the phone, you see things and get messages which are strongly negative. That affects you. I remember once I had done this experiment. I had television sitting in my room with a cable connected. I noticed that when the TV was on, there was a certain onslaught of a certain grade of energies. Even now, recently I went to somebody's house and they had the TV on, and it was very strong, the disruption. But when I switched off the TV, it seemed to go away. And then one day there was a problem and the signal was not present. And that's when I realized actually even what had gone away dropped further down. So just the fact that there was a cable plugged in, the TV was off, it was on what we call sleep mode, had still some underlying disruption energetically. I switched off the power in the TV, it dropped a little further. I disconnected the cable, it dropped a little further. Interesting. Today you don't have the cable. You have the phone in your hand and it's linked wireless. As long as it's on, there is a certain vibration. You open social media and you watch a little bit, even if what you're watching is not so disturbing. Behind that is the energetic pressure of all the other disturbances. So there's a lot that's happening currently which is affecting people, and some of it is also the result of the programming that is being worked upon you through the social media and other means, where you're pushed to think in ways which are not aligned to your soul's aspiration. So there are a lot of misalignments on many levels, caused sometimes deliberately and sometimes incidentally, which lead to these kinds of internal stresses and subsequently mental health disorders. people do not realize watching 1 hour or 2 hours of social media or other has a dulling effect on the brain, reduces your IQ, weakens your power of concentration, weakens your will, holds you in a state of hypnosis so long, so frequently, that there's a point after which you are tending to live in a half hypnotized state at all times. There's recently some articles you will see about what is called the Gen Z stare, Generation Z stare. So occasionally Generation Z, these are people, not too sure, 20, 30 years ago, born 20, 25 years ago, something like that, who have been on social media much of their life. They have a particular stare. Suddenly while sitting, their eyes will blank out and it's as if they're not there. It's blanked, looking nowhere, sensing nothing, seeing nothing, and they're in this blank state in the middle of a conversation. And you look at them and it feels strange. Those who are not part of that, when they notice it, it can be a bit disturbing. What is this? And it's actually a state of semi-hypnosis that you have been brought into so often, so many times, that you tend to fall into it every now and then with no effort at all. And all of these are very serious, disturbing signs of where the younger generation is being led to and what it is being led to become. And many of the mental health disorders are incidental to all this. So it's a longish response, but from a spiritual point of view, you can understand this. The corrective methods from here will be also more complex. It means for them to take charge of their life, take charge of their mind, break out of that semi-hypnosis, start thinking, becoming conscious of their thoughts, becoming conscious of their actions, becoming conscious of influences, choosing then to refuse certain influences, etc. Literally coming back into your own and not living as a puppet. That would be one of the major corrections. Not easy if you have grown up from childhood in this half-hypnotized state. Jessica has an interesting comment. Not all national anthems are peaceful songs. Some Ukraine anthems vocalize the fields of wheat, are fed with the blood of enemies. My cousin was adopted by Ukrainian family. Yes, that's interesting also. So a lot depends on the values which define the nation, and particularly in the forming of the nation. What do you go back to and say, this is what defined us? It's interesting to ask that question. And I mentioned perhaps recently that I was in an event in the United States nearly 10 or 15 years ago, and they had the national anthem playing, 1,000 people standing like this. But the images were fascinating. They were all soldiers conquering territory. And something there made me very uncomfortable. How much of the patriotism was seized by these images to turn it into a conquering mentality to conquer others? Now, this is not the American identity. This is not the American soul. But this was the America that was shaped after George Bush took over 2001, 9/11, etc. They turned it into this praise of military conquest of world. It was not so before. If you go back to the original sense of the American national identity and the American soul, we had a discussion with Narad in one of the very early evenings series. Do take a look at that. It was very interesting. Sri Aurobindo referred to that. He says, do you remember the vision that George Washington had? And he saw America's soul as a woman, and she showed him the future to come and the three great attacks, the third of which is ongoing currently. So there's a very different take one could have on the anthem itself if those visuals were changed. The way you interpret the Star-Spangled Banner in the case of the United States. Or if, as in this case, fields of wheat are fed with the blood of enemies, then it means the identity is largely reactionary or protective ego based on a physical separation, struggle, identity, etc. It would not align to the soul values. And I would even suggest that Ukraine should reformulate its national anthem in a formation that better represents its soul values, what makes it distinct, unique, its higher aspiration, etc. And these things have a huge, huge impact. Remember, observe yourself when you are listening to a national anthem and all of your patriotism kicks in. What is this patriotism? I'm sorry, I'm going to put it very crudely. National ego. I, this nation, this identity, we are so great, we are different from. Even if it is beautiful and happy and nice, it's still national ego. And nothing wrong with ego. Ego is good. But it must give in to something higher. It must open to the soul. It must become a vehicle and instrument for the divine will or the soul's action, etc. So, ego is good. It's a stage of development. But does it point to the more than, or does it stop with the ego? Does it point to the nation's soul? Do you have something of the soul light reflecting through? That's important. But notice, when you are in that state, every word that's being spoken or sung in the national anthem as if burns into you. And then those words act as triggers. That's what we would call hypnotic programming. If that keyword is stated by somebody, cluck, it wakes you up. It triggers that. It triggers that mood. Puts you into that state when you can be manipulated easily. So that's why, going back to the earlier question of Vaijayanti, if you make Vandemataram your song, motto, greeting, it can have a profound impact. When you say Namaste with the true sense of what it means, it has a profound impact in this way. I'll just look at a couple of other questions. Anupam, is there any possibility of regime change in West Bengal? I have not seen any possibility of that. The way central working of Bihar election now, they don't even put half the effort for Bengal. Why? Sujata is asking, do you think NRIs must return to India in coming years due to safety issues, racism in Western countries? Just take these both up. No, not necessarily. Whatever you may see of racism or safety issues have always been there. It's not something new. It's human beings have these issues. It's normal. If it seems like it's growing, don't trust the media. Somebody is playing you. A lot of what is projected in media as trends of hate, crime, etc., a lot of it is made up. In the sense that, yes, maybe they happened, but the slant given by the media is made up. In India, for example, very often you see somebody died, somebody was attacked, somebody was robbed. If it's the leftist media, suddenly they will say, Dalit student robbed. They'll bring into it some such twist and make it a caste issue somehow. And where it doesn't serve them, they will hide the identity completely and say someone was killed by someone, and that's it. And then you know exactly who did what because they don't want to say it. So, the media has a way of exaggerating. And especially now you must understand, there is no such thing as a shared media view. Earlier you would have a newspaper headline which was seen by a few million people perhaps, the same headline, the same newspaper structure. So the editors had to make sure they held a certain balanced view that would be acceptable and interesting enough to those million people. Today's media is custom made to you. In other words, Google or some other Facebook or one of these powerful entities using their AI is tailoring what you see and shaping your thinking and value system by controlling what you see in a way that you are completely unable to defend yourself from. And let me say it very bluntly, even with the best of intentional awareness, you will not be able to protect yourself from the slant that it creates within you. It will happen. You may need to consciously override from the point you detect it. But if it happens slowly enough, you may not even detect it. It's that powerful. And each person is being given a completely different newspaper, tailor-made to you. And designed around what the AI has already figured out is your temperament, your belief system and values. So they know exactly which points to push you, to trigger you, or to shape your behavior. This is being done deliberately. So there is no such thing as an attempt even to be unbiased or provide some kind of a common baseline of news. You're being hammered with whatever it is they think will lead to the outcomes that they want from you. So coming back to this question, racism, safety issues, etc., nothing has fundamentally changed. If anything, I would say, generally speaking, things are better, at least in those spaces which are still largely civilized. There are spaces where they are not so, and they have been bad, but they have been just as bad. So it's not such a big deal. So I would say, no, don't get carried away. Do not trust the media. Do not trust impressions that the media creates. That's how powerful the technology actually is. But coming to West Bengal and Anupam's question, regime change will depend on people waking up. And then in West Bengal, there's the additional problem, which is the very large numbers of illegal immigrants, because the border with Bangladesh, which actually before partition was one big Bengal. Of course, there's difference, east and west, qualitative differences, but one side could go to the other side. Other than a shift in accent, you would not know. That's how integrated it was. So, and until recently, until about 15 years ago, the borders were open, porous. You could, in the middle of the night, get up and walk across. Just because there were rangers walking around, you missed them at night, you got across, you could go anywhere. Millions of people have come. Bihar alone, as you can see in the recheck of voter identities, they have had to eliminate some nearly 70 lakhs. That's 700,000 people who have either died or moved out or have duplicate identities, and it's so prevalent. Even in Pondicherry, which is such a small space, the person who was working with us, on the day of voting, he says, I have to go early because I have to go to 2 different places to vote. How do you do that? He says, I have 2 different identities in different places. I am going to vote in each. What do you do? Because there's a mark they put. Oh, that's not a problem. And he told me the technique which they are taught to remove the mark. So he goes, votes somewhere, there's a black ink mark. He comes immediately, rubs it off with a certain technique, goes to the other places and votes. Why? I get paid. That's how crude it is. So yes, it needs a major cleanup. And when people do wake up, yes, inevitably it will change. But I'm going to ask a more deep question. When West Bengal was held in the grip of the leftists, and they broke away from that, and the present chief minister then took over, she came with such great hopes. People had so much hope. I know people who really said, oh, finally, something is happening. And what happened that she swung in a way which has been so harmful? What is it that anybody who comes to power would then have to face the way she faced? That might also swing them. This needs to be really looked at deeply. Because you must understand, a politician's first priority is survival on the seat. You're not a politician if you don't get elected ever. So you get elected, once you're elected, you don't want to lose that seat, otherwise you don't do anything, isn't it? So what is it that made the present chief minister compromise away from what seemed to be the promise that she had brought? And that will be faced by others. And maybe some of this has to do with the illegal immigrants, some of it has to do with other issues. It's something to think about. I'm going to continue with the questions which I had for today. Nitin had an interesting question. He says, one thing remains unanswered. Trump and Elon were supposed to bring about the next big change, free energy, universal income, etc. For the AI age is upon us. Is there falling apart simply divine optics, or something has shifted that line of evolution? So I was going to ask, where do you get this idea that they were supposed to bring next big change of free energy and universal income, etc.? There was a lot of such speculation. I'm aware of that. There was a lot of such hope that Trump would actually do those things. And I don't know whether that can be done yet. You see, the interests which would want to block such freedom of humanity are still too strong in their position of power. If you bring light prematurely in a space of mixed darkness, let's say, where the darkness is still powerful enough that it can catch the nascent light and suffocate it, then it is premature. There has to be a gradual or maybe a series of such attempts which get suffocated, which allow for a gradual tilt until some part of the light is strong enough to hold its own against this attack, and then it becomes stronger and overturns the darkness, and then eventually can fully reveal itself. That's the way it has to go. What we are seeing today in the United States is a huge shift. And I'm going to again say something which might sound a bit extreme. The more than 50% of the United States believes in Trump. The overwhelming majority that voted for him, despite all the impression that the media has created for you. Remember, it was overwhelming majority that voted for Trump in every way, state level as well as national level. All these people who used to vote Democrat earlier switched sides just for Trump, not for the Republican Party. Just that is a huge breakthrough. How far can you push that without already the pushback becoming overwhelming? So I don't think we are yet ready on that level where the government might make available free energy or other whatever else. I'm not sure universal income in that way we would be ready for. But to what extent that can happen is a moot point. Again, this universal income, etc., I'm not sure whether that's really the way forward, at least for the near future, for the simple reason that if you observe a person who has got a lot of money suddenly, do they actually use that to grow in consciousness, or do they fall into inertia or lose their way even in excesses? That's the balance which decides whether you're ready for that comfort. It's a practical problem of communism. Communism makes this promise that we will take care of you, don't worry, you'll be given everything. Now you're free to do what it is you like to do, or the job given to you by the state in the worst case. But in the best case, you're free to do what you want to do, what you like to do, what you're good at. What happens then? At some point, the people lose the push to keep doing. They slide into inertia. As long as the tendency to slide into inertia is stronger than the aspiration to grow, you are not ready for that level of comfort. You need the kick, you need the pain, you need the struggle of survival to make you make that extra effort. This transition could be made easily if the education from childhood was turned towards nourishing your spiritual aspiration, or at least the evolutionary aspiration. And it can be a very superficial evolution, but still it can be a growth, healthy growth. But in the current status, I do not know if a large part of humanity would be able to make that. It's to be seen. But I'm just sharing with you issues which are involved in the finding an answer to these questions. Okay, I come to a very important set of questions from Arnab. This is from the evening series 248. He writes, 1. We have often seen Trump resort to exaggerated statements or even outright political theatre to keep the mainstream media busy with their anti-Trump headlines, while he goes on and accomplishes some hidden objective. His rhetorics on making Canada the 51st state, or seizing Panama Canal, or taking over Gaza seems to point to that. I think you've all seen headlines around these statements of Trump. Or even buying out Greenland. In case of Panama Canal incident, what eventually happened was Panama cut US fees by 20%, saving $500 million. In the case of Gaza, Egypt came up with a proposal to rebuild it, effectively loosening their purse strings in constructive effort. Can you please share some insights on if and how Trump uses political theater as a means of distraction to achieve his goals? I think Arnav has already given some very good examples of this. Remember, I mentioned last time, Trump is a negotiator, and as a negotiator, he'll always start with an excessive position and then scale back. He'll always take a hard position and then come to a compromise. That's the strategy. And it's a very reasonable strategy which is normally used in all business deals. And he's making business deals right now. So what he did with Panama, eventually you see nobody's talking about Panama, but nowhere did your mainstream media tell you that Trump was successful in that negotiation with Panama. He said they will not allow Chinese control. He said they will not allow US to be sidelined. And eventually Panama caved in and gave them a fee reduction of 20%, $500 million, etc. When Trump released a video in which he said that we will make the Gaza Strip into Riviera, in the Middle East, first of all, there was the chaos which the mainstream media played on, but in the Middle East, all the countries around who were immediately impacted by that came together and made a counter proposal for rebuilding of Gaza. So effectively, Trump managed to get his outcome required by starting with a hardball position and then encouraging the rebuilding. So it's a normal strategy that he uses. He knows the media is always anti-Trump. So they feed on negative news, which also he gives them as and when required. But his strategy, if you have read his general approach to life and to negotiation, his strategy is to work behind the scenes and then expose things only when the thing is achieved. When he takes a position, he says, I'm going to do this. On some level, he has already set the process in place behind the scenes. And which is the reason why he always ends up doing it. Without having set the process behind the scenes, he never announces that he's going to do something. He might even announce the opposite, just to release the pressure to allow him to do what needs to be done behind the scenes. So it's a strategy. If you watch carefully, you see this consistently throughout his life, not just as US president. So political theater is the phrase I have used also for today's title, but I want to generalize that theater for others. As a rule in politics, never believe what a politician says. General rule. Because politics largely today's politics, it's not the ideal politics. Today's politics is largely driven by impressions and public perception. And politicians need to manipulate public perception to stay in power. Remember, that's their first requirement. You come to power, if you lose power, you can't do what you're going to do. So first requirement before you can do good or bad or whatever misuse you want of the power is to stay in power. For doing that, you have to play people. That's political theater. What form it takes, you will see many good television serials or sometimes even good movies which have explored this. One of the very good British series was called Yes Minister and then Yes Prime Minister. It's a very good educational exercise to watch some of those episodes. While it's presented through the lens of humor, each of those examples, each one of them is real, true, and actively used today everywhere. And this is the case not only with politicians, it's also the case with other media personalities who have to deal with public perceptions. So, general rule there, don't believe what they say, observe what they do. Observe their actions, observe what they did in the last few years, despite whatever they may have said. That gives you a real picture of what they represent or their intention. Even if they say, oh, we tried this, but we could not because too much was against us, or we didn't get enough support, etc., don't believe that. If they could not do, if they did not do, they never intended to do. It's very simple. If they actually did partially, then it was intention and with resistance. But they did and they keep trying to do, then you know that this is their intention. So, first of all, distrust all politicians. And with Trump, the same principle would apply. Except, and this is the reason why his voter base continues to grow, even willing people from the other side of the aisle, is because everything he has promised, he has actually not only made the effort, in most cases successfully done. So it's quite remarkable. The same with Modi, which is what keeps him in the base. Today there was a news item that said he has now broken Indira Gandhi's record to become the second longest running Prime Minister continuously. And he might still continue longer if he maintains this image that he gets things done and he is actually helping the continuous growth of India. So a lot still depends on public perception. But that's the problem with the politician position. To maintain public perception, there's also compromise. Sometimes behind the scenes, sometimes overt and blatant. How far will they go? Where will they draw the line and say, not more? I won't rock the boat more. That is to be seen always. But political theatre is one of those things which is part of the reality. So, second, from here, corollary, do not believe the media reports of a politician. Again, go to what they are doing, sometimes what they say they will do, and then what they do actually, and the contrast between them. But do not trust what the media tells you they say or what the media says they will do. There's a big difference there. So it's important. You see media putting quote marks around phrases, but not giving you the entire speech, not giving you an entire sentence, not giving you the entire paragraph in context. Distrust the media. They're playing you somewhere. I've done this many times as an exercise. I remember once when Trump had just come to power, somebody sent me an article, and this was a New York Times article where they had done a comment. Trump said this, he said that, and then one of his voter bases said something, and it was all so dark, so disturbing. If you read that, you would think, oh my God, this is the worst evil. So I said, okay, this does not fit the data I have. Let me go to the sources. So I actually went to the actual lecture Trump gave, actual statements he made, and what the others made. It was completely different. The context was totally different. So I made that analysis, put it all together, and sent it back to my friend who sent me the original article. And I said, this is a media hit piece. The media wanted to damage his reputation by deliberately lying and decontextualizing his statements. And here's the facts. So I did a whole research. It took me a couple of hours. And the person not only did not respond, they did not speak with me for a long time. That was the strange thing. Interesting. Because it exposed somewhere that the person wanted to believe this, and suddenly the reality was totally different, and it created an internal conflict. They would rather not face it. They shut contact with me for this. It's fascinating to observe this. And this is the way we internally manage when we are faced with this kind of, the phrase for that is, so when you're faced with two contradictory statements, two contradictory positions, or one of your pet positions is contradicted strongly by facts, what do? How do you handle this? Dissonance. It's an internal dissonance. It does not align. What do you do? And in most cases, people tend to back off and withdraw and say, anyway, I don't like this political field, and walk off from that conversation because they don't want to face this. Rather than say, oh my God, the media has been lying to me. You don't want to say that. You want to say, I can't face this politics. Oh, all these politicians are equally bad. That was not the case. You saw something which really you had difficulty internalizing. So observe these tendencies in yourself and learn to deal with it. So political theatre and the media, I've generalized from the question a little bit. But it's useful in this case to study how Trump manages things. But you must go behind the scenes. Second question from Arnab. On a related note, how much of the spat between Trump and Musk was political theatre versus actual damage in their relationships? Given the long association and work history, and especially after gutting US aid, some insights on the big beautiful bill, if possible, that seems to increase debt ceiling by $1 to $2 trillion. I've already spoken about this, so I don't go too much into detail, but just to recapitulate, both are really smart. Elon Musk is very high IQ, 150. Trump is 150 IQ. Now, sometimes very high IQ tend to have emotional issues, or they don't have patience with situations that are too dumb. That's a different story. But they don't do stupid things in a consistent way. Even if someone does something stupid, occasionally they'll correct for it immediately because they see the consequences. Both are successful businessmen. You can't do big business without being very realistic, without being tested each day, every moment, every decision, where you have to make sure everything works out for the business success. So, or you're a failed businessman. If one of them was a failed businessman, I would have said, okay, they can do stupid things. But if they're successful, they can't do stupid things. It's like the military. And successful business, especially in the kind of businesses both have broken ground in. It's like the military. If you are incompetent, even momentarily distracted, you can be knocked out and killed. It's that bad. And you sustain through that and come through. So both I put on very high level of competence, of intelligence, of ability to manifest and actualize their goals based purely on track record, and far better than anybody you see on the same field, in the same zone. For them to make stupid mistakes like this or get so abusive publicly is not normal. So it was very obvious it was theatre, and I had mentioned that before. You see more recently Trump coming back with completely contrary statements saying, yeah, but I want him to succeed, I don't want him to fail. What is interesting, and you have to observe carefully when the game was played, when I was watching to see who was saying what, there were people around Trump making statements which the media presented as the Trump administration position, and Trump kept quiet. And then you know that they're playing a game. Give another example recently with Ukraine. While Trump was saying he wanted the war to stop, and he was actually promoting negotiation, forcing Ukraine and Russia to negotiate to end the war quickly, there were two politicians from his party who were going to Ukraine. One of them was Senator Lindsey Graham. He was going to Ukraine, meeting with Ukrainian President, and making completely contrary statements from Trump. Now, if you saw what was happening, and Trump was saying nothing about it, if you saw that, then you would recognize that within the party itself, there were different groups. Trump was not overtly exposing the other group. He was letting them have their say and do their play. Media was playing you by mixing the two positions, and so you never knew what was Trump's position, what was party position, what were internal contradictions within party. So, which is what made for a lot of the confusion in the media. And Lindsey Graham, by the way, if you see the track record, is deep state, hardcore deep state puppet of the cabal. So what he was saying was actually intended to promote further war. Subsequently, Trump came back with a statement which was not obviously contrary, but it was very different, where he said, we will provide equipment, military equipment to Ukraine. But then if you looked into the fine print, the equipment was not for bombing or attacking Russia, it was defensive to create this equivalent of the Iron Dome and missile defense. So there was a very clear strategy on Trump's side to not go against his own party who were opposing him, and yet to hold his ground. So these are nuances which are lost if you just follow the media presentations of what's happening. There's a huge struggle ongoing, which Trump is still having to have within his own party, considering that, let's say, a majority of his own party is against him or against his agenda of cleaning up the whole political space. And as a consequence, the big beautiful bill which Trump had to get through, he had to pass not only his opponents within his party but also the opposite party, for which many compromises are needed. And that's the increased debt ceiling, etc., which has to satisfy all those people who would not otherwise let the bill pass. So literally each group which has said yes has its hand in the pie in one of the things where there is wasteful expenditure. So they are getting their fill, hence they agree to the bill. And that's the way Trump has to manage, and this is pure business management, where you accept certain kinds of compromise for a particular outcome, which is so important that the compromise is worthwhile. And he got his agendas through, with those compromises. If you see it in this way, it makes a lot of sense, without which he would not get his agenda through and nothing would happen. So these are practical things, and later, of course, those other things which have been passed can always be neutralized. Under some technicality or other, they will do an investigation and discover, this was wasteful spending, or there was some diversion of funds, and they crack down and stop the fund flow. It's easy to do later. So I hope this helps understanding the situation. Third question from Arnab. Speaking of US aid and what happened to DOGE, that's the Department of Government Efficiency, which cut down the wasteful expenditure. How feasible is it to save the economy from bankruptcy, especially since de-dollarization in international trade is gaining momentum? My view on this is there is a very strong possibility of saving the US from bankruptcy. Very strong. And Trump is pushing in that direction. One of the things which was fascinating to see in Trump's first presidency was how quickly he was able to reverse the indebtedness of the US economy. How quickly he was able to get free from the oil dependence that US had. How quickly he rebuilt national reserves of oil and other strategic reserves. And that was absolutely stunning. I would compare this with Elon Musk and the rapidity with which he gets his projects accomplished. So again, I have a strong expectation that there will be some radical shifts taking place. So for some of which he's already preparing by putting pressure on the US Federal Bank and forcing certain changes in their policies and making his choice of who will be the next head of the Feds, etc. It's when that happens that you will then see the full shift and the rapidity with which a lot of this bankruptcy would be avoided. It's also the prime reason why he was threatening the BRICS countries, and already the fact that he got Modi to back the deliberately not de-dollarizing position inside BRICS, which China wanted, and Modi took a stand against China for the US. Just that has created a certain shift. It won't happen so easily, but it's happening already slowly. And I think the idea is to gradually let that excessive place that the dollar had to slowly drop, but in a graded way reintegrate it with the US without strong shocks anywhere. If that can be done carefully, it will be good. Otherwise, a sudden collapse would be harmful for everybody. So this is a skill, a position of skill. It demands a huge amount of control in how it's handled. Recently, for example, these are such amazing strategic moves if you look at the implications. Recently, Trump did something which was so amazing strategically. You see, there's a huge trade happening in what is called cryptocurrency, particularly Bitcoin, but there are nearly a couple of hundred cryptocurrencies. Not all of them will survive. The bulk of them will crash eventually. Maybe 2 or 3 might survive, of which Bitcoin is the strongest. What Trump did was, when people deal with cryptocurrencies, in the transition from one crypto to another, they have to hold their finances somewhere. And these were called stable coins. And the stable coins were generally associated with the US dollar. So you sell a crypto, hold your money in stable coin equivalent to dollar, but it's not a dollar. And then you buy another crypto. So that intermediate transition stable coin is, well, always doubtful. You never know if it might crash. Who backs it eventually? So you have to go on somebody's word. What Trump did was, he mandated that the stable coin be backed with the US dollar or linked to the US dollar. So first of all, it makes stable coin much more stable. But on the other hand, it makes US dollar essential to all crypto transactions. And suddenly, just like that, overnight, the US dollar has become so much stronger. Now, these are strategic moves. I even stopped to think. I find it difficult to imagine how he gets such an idea. Is it merely somebody who has a brilliant insight who tells him? Or is there a team working behind the scenes? Or is it just his intuition? As a strategic move, it is so brilliant and so insightful. And one wonders, why didn't anyone think about it before? So these are the hallmarks of genius moves. Musk similarly has many such genius moves. So this is one of those things which suddenly overnight the US dollar is so much stronger. So much stronger. It's almost as strong as the crypto. It's required for crypto and everybody is going to rely on it and change the perspective. So there are many such moves, I suppose, which are still might surprise us. So fourth question from Arnab. Lastly, will EU or China become the global epicenter of the cabal if Trump manages to clean up USA? And also given how actively EU wants the Russia-Ukraine war to become protracted and China openly aligns with terror state Pakistan to destabilize India. Yes, so it seems like if the US, if Trump manages to clean up US, that's still a long way off. It might easily take another 5-10 years. But at least in the next 3 years, we should see a significant shift. And that momentum once gained, it might be difficult to undo. That is what we will hope happens during the Trump presidency. If and when that does happen, then you see already what's happening. A lot of the cabal focal points of operation are moving. And one of the methods they have used first of all is to shift a lot of their assets and technologies into China, because China being a monolith, it's easy to manage things. But you must understand, China appears to be a monolith. It's not so simple. Internally, there are other power groups. Those of you who read Mark Obern's latest book, The Tempest, would recall a very interesting interaction he had with a secret society in China, which is extremely powerful and extremely wealthy. So there are groups like that. They have a certain, even we would say, spiritual opening in the Taoist pattern, I would say, from what I understood reading the book. They also have an understanding of extraterrestrial contact and presence on Earth. So it's a group that's quite powerful and quite deeply knowledgeable. There are groups like that which are behind the scenes. It's not just the Communist Party. And they have obviously some kind of engagement and backing off or backing for the Communist Party for whatever strategy. But these are groups which often have a staying power for a long time. So this, but again, China is not a monolith. There are groups which would back Pakistan. There are groups which would not want to have conflict with India. At some point, their interests might align. They might say, all right, we'll back Pakistan, or we will just keep India under pressure but not harm India. There are many compromises one may make in politics. So it's all a very murky space. But Europe definitely is very much in the cabal control. But this is the interesting part, and for me this is most important. If Trump can clean up the US significantly, the impact it will have on global politics and the cleanup of the world will be so huge that the cabal will not have any strong center left, even if it is temporarily within the based in the EU or partially with China. It will not be able to last too long. And this is really the hope for humanity, which is what I have pointed to in the earlier parts of our discussion. If these disruptors, maybe Trump, maybe others, if these disruptors can sufficiently make this transition, and humanity as a whole, in a significant part, can sufficiently wake up, these two combinations would create for a stability that would prevent any further fallback. Can this happen? Well, that's what we have to see. One point I wanted to make about the earlier comment that I said, do not trust the media or the political posturings. I put a link there which is about the CEO of a company called Crowds on Demand. Now this is a company which offers you crowds. You pay them money, they'll get you a crowd to do whatever it is you want. You want a demonstration for make up your own topic, make up your own public cause. Pay them money and you'll have your crowd. How many do you want? For how long? Pay them enough, you get whatever you want. What do you want them to say? They will say it. This is in the US, it's a company. And CEO of that, Crowds on Demand, he says he rejected a $20 million offer for anti-Trump protests nationwide. Think of what the implications are. That means the group that wanted you to have an impression that the whole of US woke up and was protesting Trump. And the protest at that point was the one which declared, Trump, we don't want a king, we don't want an emperor. That protest. They wanted to create nationwide protests, and they were willing to pay $20 million to get the numbers of crowds to make those protests, for which then the media would come, film that for a few seconds, and then make headlines the next day. Oh, the whole of USA is waking up against Trump and declaring that we don't want a king. Think of the implications. $20 million, it's not much. It's pocket change for some of these big fish like George Soros or others. What they would have done. But this CEO says publicly that he refused the offer. Now, if you have lived in India and seen a little bit of the politics here, you would not be too surprised. In India, we have something similar. Political parties can raise large crowds, just like that. And it's their crowd raising capacity which makes them powerful in your eyes. So suddenly you have a political rally where 100,000 people have gathered. You know what they do? They pay people. They pay them money. They give them food. They give them gifts. And that's how they get these groups to come. And the same groups will go for a rally against this party when the other side calls them. They are professional rally crowds. They go wherever they are called. They get paid, and that's all. So they have a whole grassroots machinery that they can activate. They have buses loads which bring the rally people, take them back to their villages, but accumulate them in one place through the day. They dedicate a whole day for this. They go back with the money they've made for attending the rally. That's how political parties do it in India and otherwise in the USA. Knowing this, when the media shows you a rally, when the media says there's such and such demonstration, when there is a nationwide lockdown, there's a band, we call it, it's a lockdown by the left parties, etc. All these are fake. So there was a lockdown recently, nationwide. There was a nationwide, we call it band. The band means closure, translated as lockdown. So suddenly we were all told all the banks will be closed, post office is closed, all businesses will be closed. Okay. The next question, for what is it? And I asked this to a dozen people. Everyone said, I don't know, something, some politician, something. So why are you closing? The response always is, if we don't close, their party will come and break our business. They'll break the glass, they'll destroy our things. So out of fear of being hit by the thugs, goons of the political parties, you close your business knowing nothing about what it is that they're calling for a closure for. Fear of local thugs is what makes a closure successful across the country. Think of what that means. The political parties calling for these closures have a network of thugs across the country in every state, district, city, town, village, whose job it is to go roam the streets, and if they find somebody who has not closed their shop, to break, force them to close. This is the reality of crowds. This is the reality of the political postures, of numbers. It means nothing. So you may get an impression as if, oh, the whole country was in lockdown, shut down against whatever the thing was. And as I turned out, I looked at the next day, what is the newspaper saying? What is the news? What are those parties who asked for the lockdown demanding? Oh, they were against the anti-national policies and anti-poor policies of the present government. Which policies? I look further, nothing stated. And then they said, oh, it was successful. So many crores of people had shut their businesses and it was a great success. What value did it have? But the impression you have is, oh, this is a powerful party because they can demand a lockdown and get it. In other words, they have goons on the grassroots. So, this is an example I wanted to give of political theatre, political posturings, and what does it really mean in terms of people's actual beliefs. So, it's possible that the actual beliefs of people have grown and changed so much, you see no sign on the surface, until suddenly one day everything flips and the whole thing is gone. And you would not have seen it coming because the appearances were maintained. So I greatly suspect many of the questions which Arnab has asked, that we might actually end up with a kind of a sudden flip. Trump's victory in this case, in the present elections, was one such great flip. Modi's first victory in 2014 was one such flip. And then comes the media manipulations which will follow. But when that flip happened, it was one of these sudden shifts seen on the surface. Till then, the media gave you the impression that nobody would have stood by or stood for him, both Modi or Trump. And then suddenly this thing happens, where the majority overwhelmingly backs him. So yes, such things will also happen. I'll just go back to the chat box for anything else. Interesting comments from many of the viewers. Rajesh has a comment. Sometimes I think I should trust you blindly since you seem to be right about everything, and then it occurs to me I should only trust the Divine Mother. Yes, I had also another comment which came from one of the comments on the video, which I saw. Somebody writes, "Oh, Ranade sounds like a blind follower of Trump. He justifies all Trump's actions and stupidities." So I would simply say, do not blindly trust, nor assume somebody is blind. Every statement I have made so far, I have backed it with reason, logic, facts wherever possible, or trends. If it makes sense, and that's my intention, recognize these and train yourself to now look behind the appearances. The goal of this series is to provoke you to think and look behind the surface and begin to sense and observe these trends. If, as a result of this discussion, you begin to see that and you say, yes, this makes sense, it's not because I said it that it is true, it's because you saw it that you'll recognize the value of it. So don't trust me, trust your own judgment, using these observations as one of the crutches or one of the helpers or one of the reference points, and do your own research, do your own observations. So I've given many examples in passing. Sometimes I have also repeated some examples, but they are intended to help you now to observe those very things. When tomorrow the news changes, observe. So just after last discussion on the judiciary, the very next day, within the next 2 or 3 days, there was this massive shift that took place. The Vice President of India resigned. The most vocal critic of the Indian judiciary, who actually made active suggestions for change, suddenly resigns. And nobody knew why. What happened there? Look deeper. Don't go by what the politicians say. Look at the facts. Look at what he said. Look at what were the pressures he was under. And maybe you'll see a certain trend line. You say, interesting. And then wait and watch. Never jump to conclusions. You just take provisionally. It looks like this might be happening. Wait and watch. Look for confirmation or contradictions. Wait and watch. Never rush to conclusions. So, for example, in this drama that you had Trump and Elon Musk criticizing each other, wait. Wait for a month, wait for 2 months, and then see what happens. And suddenly the drama unwound. And the whole thing dissolved, practically. In fact, they came out stronger. So one of the things I did not share, it's a bit odd here. So when this spat took place, one of the things which happened was the share value of Elon Musk's companies dropped. Remember, one of the grouses, criticisms that Elon Musk has is that in his own company he does not own enough shares that he could be kicked out. And many times they have tried to do that. So he says, I need to have enough to ensure that I can't be kicked out, but I can be put aside if I do something crazy. But I shouldn't be kicked out after all the effort that I make to build the company. And what happens, each time his shares fall, he knows nothing is wrong, well, he can buy. And then later tries again. So on certain levels, there are things happening behind the scenes which are advantageous in many ways. And Elon Musk doesn't care if his shares fall, because he knows the intrinsic strength of what he's doing. They will rise again. But when they fall, it's also an opportunity for him to strengthen his control of the stocks, among other things. So there are things like that. If you had the data, you would then observe where did he make purchases, when did he make sales, what were happening behind the scenes with the stock prices. And you'll find an interesting pattern which will weave into this whole play which took place also. So there are many sides to these complex situations, and it's worth analyzing fully if you like to do that kind of analysis. Vajayanti asks, has Sri Aurobindo or the mother commented upon views and strategy of Chanakya regarding politics and economics? I don't know, but Sri Aurobindo has spoken extensively about the man that Chanakya built up, Chandragupta, and with great appreciation for what he achieved, and also the governance systems that he built, obviously built by Chanakya. So I don't know if Sri Aurobindo actively says too much more about Chanakya itself, but the consequences of what happened there is significant, and historically for India is one of those critical turning points which made possible the India of today. Consequence of what Chanakya did is amazing. So for those who don't know the history, Chanakya was this extraordinary, intelligent teacher with mastery of statecraft, let's say, who finds that the king is too corrupt. When he tries to make a change, he cannot. So he says, I will rebuild the whole thing. He picks a young man in whom he sees the potential to be a leader, grooms him to become the new leader, provokes a political crisis, overthrows the king and replaces with his ward, who then becomes one of the greatest lineages of emperors in India. One man to be able to do that, it's not normal. He's a vibhuti. But it's the kind of thing which we are seeing today with a few of these disruptive players in the world. There's a certain power behind which allows them to accomplish things which are exceptional. And without a certain inner base, one cannot be so effective. That power cannot act. You need a really cool, strong inner basis, stable, through which it can act, and impersonally, selflessly. So I'm just putting your question in this context. So Tutun is saying, Paramahansa Yogananda said America's big corporations will fall, banking system will also fall, dollar will not be of the value of the paper on which it is printed. I'd be interested to see, if you have a reference for that, I'd be interested to see. But there are general observations which have been made by many, that I think it was Swami Vivekananda who commented also that regarding China, he said it's a giant that is asleep, and when it wakes up it will shake the world, something to the effect. We are seeing that consequence 100 years, more than 100 years later. So yes, one can perceive such things, certain trend lines in the future. Some of these are karmic, some of these are consequences of the current trends. Some of them may be possibilities which could still be neutralized or modified. So it's to be seen what form. So I would be very careful to see exactly what the words he used versus how people interpret it. And sometimes there can be a big difference. Rajashi's comment, I feel thinking for myself isn't sufficient if it is not under the influence of the Divine Mother. Yes, obviously. So I'm going to restate that. What does it mean for your thinking to be under the influence of the Divine Mother? Observe what you mean by that. Does it mean that your thinking, consciousness is aware of her presence, of the spiritual presence generally, while it's thinking? Therefore, through that awareness is receiving its light and discrimination and intuition influence? If that be the case, then understand what it is, understand what is happening, and this is the direction generally of the growth of your mind and intellect that you should consciously cultivate. Opening to the higher intuition, opening to the higher knowledge, opening to the higher discrimination which comes with that influence. And let your mind be molded and flooded with that more and more so that it gives you the insight straight. And when that happens, you will be able to see through with a certain rapidity of these circumstances. Straight away you see this, you say, something is not okay, that's not true, there's something behind. What is that? You look a little bit and you'll find the evidence. There it is. That's what it was. And that's the way the intuition will guide you as you grow more and more into it. Yes, you must develop this. But it does not mean that you become passive and say, I will only think of the Divine Mother, I won't apply my intelligence. That would be a kind of withdrawal from use of your faculties. It is to activate and utilize and develop your faculties of intelligence under that influence, filled with that influence, led by and even shaped by that influence more and more. That's the way to go forward. I want to close with one couple of questions, maybe one. There were some very important questions I'll have to unfortunately skip, but come to something important. Emilium says, your analogy of the man running to cause harm reminds me of Mother's words about the critical point of the Third World War, which will not be crossed. I haven't been able to find the exact source of the Mother's words, so I'll paraphrase. The Mother tells us that war should be a way to exhaust weapons so that there will be none left on earth in the future. And then he quotes from the Mother in the agenda, February 18th, 1973. The Mother says, for the moment we are still in a stage where weapons are necessary. But it should be understood that this is a transitory stage, not a permanent one. And we must strive for the other stage, peace. Peace and harmony will be a natural outcome of the change of consciousness. Well, we should strive for that. Doesn't mean it will happen overnight. It will take a while. But that's the direction we have to move towards. So, Emilian's question, could you tell us more about these words? Because you are currently talking about the wars of the future. Don't you think the time will soon come when all the current wars will exhaust all weapons? So, when I spoke about the wars of the future, you saw already that the things I was describing were a sublimation of the current crude weapons. In that very sublimation is also the other side of the extreme war, which is what is called MAD, M-A-D, mutually assured destruction. If you destroy me, I will destroy you, so we better not do it. And that's one of the transitions through which the human need for war or aggression or fear or conquest or whatever it is, the form that it works through, it's one of the ways by which these two come to some kind of stalemate to train themselves to begin to trust each other more and more. So if you think of it in this way, the moment the war sublimates to a point where there is no way you can protect, both are equally vulnerable to each other by exactly the same methods, you have come to that point where you have to begin to trust each other and start making some compromise. And that's where you are training yourself to trust. And remember, all this is at a very crude level. It's the lowest grade of human survival needs. That's what defines these international conflicts. And at that level, you are learning to build a kind of a trust. And the trust initially is on the basis of this. A promise that I promise I will destroy you if you destroy me. And then it becomes a positive. If you don't destroy me or try to destroy me, I promise not to try to destroy you. But if it ever comes to that, I will do it. And then from there, mutually, sufficiently, you build interactions, mutual dependences where with this kind of thing, I wouldn't even want to destroy you because I'm so dependent on you. And I know the other wouldn't want to destroy me because they're so dependent on me. And that's how you build. So this was Mother's advice. To prevent wars, she said, you have to build people-to-people contact and then economic interdependence. When you have these two and the integration takes place on these levels, it makes war impossible. It's unfortunately one of the methods of the Asura to create one small terror attack with one crazy person, to break that trust and to create those divisions. So what you see, for example, which happened between Pakistan and India, or more recently between Bangladesh and India, economic disconnection, which makes more likely future conflicts because the interdependence is not there. But on the other hand, it's also a way by which you punish the other side for a transgression, by which hopefully the other side will not do it again. So it's a very subtle and painful transition, not at all spiritual in its underlying basis. It's very crude, coarse survival instincts of humanity. But it's as if through this, on that level of international politics, we would evolve to a higher grade. But I want to come to this, end this with this idea of the necessity for some form of protection of what? Now here we are not talking about political protection or economic protection, but of the values that the civilization holds. Even if you had to lose economically to protect those values, you would be willing to do that. I'll come back to the comment we made about the Kargil war or others. If you're willing to die on the border, it should be for a cause that you think so great that even with your death you will be serving it. Then you're willing to die for it. What is such a cause? Is there such a cause? What are you fighting for? What are you living for? Or dying for that matter? And all this points to the higher core of the civilizational values and then the soul of the nation. So even if on the surface and on the border you have these very crude struggles, if something of the soul values or the civilizational core values are sufficiently strong, in relation to that, on the strength of that, you can hold your own. But you must be willing to stand firm and not cave in. Because on the other side, you may not have something which respects, or something which may want to destroy precisely that which you're trying to protect. And you should be willing to stand and hold firm. So I had mentioned last time Sri Aurobindo's letter to Sahana, and I'm going to read that in this context. And in this context, it prepares us for the theme which will be for next time and the time after, which I have planned for, where I want to discuss a more subtle form of conflict or attack on the higher spiritual values and even on the higher spiritual teaching that is frequently present but currently somewhat persistent. And we'll look at that from two very different angles in the next two sessions. I'll probably change the topic. I won't call it current affairs, but it will be in this line of thought. So I want to read from Sri Aurobindo's letter, which I had mentioned last time. So Sahanadi is a lady in the ashram. She's a young lady who is in the sadhana, and she is facing a problem that in the ashram there are people who are criticizing Sri Aurobindo. And her instinct is to fight back and hold ground or criticize the other. So she writes to Sri Aurobindo, I was faced by the question, if we find someone standing against a truth and attacking it by using falsehood as his means, what in that case should be the mental attitude of a sadhaka? Sadhaka is a practitioner of the spiritual path. Should he, practicing his yogic equality, be indifferent to it, or lift his sword against the falsehood? The question came up because some person wrote a letter attacking the mother and Sri Aurobindo. We were much excited by it and hotly discussed what our attitude should be towards such persons. Should we at all keep any contact with them? I was in two minds. Perhaps there should not be so strong a feeling of hostility or contempt. One of us asserted very forcefully that far from keeping any contact with such persons, if even any kind of conciliation would ever be possible. So, I wrote to Sri Aurobindo all about it. in order to know his opinion. He wrote back to me the following, fully supporting the sadhak's views. So this is what Sahana writes as the letter and the context of the letter. What did Sri Aurobindo respond to her when she asked, what should I do? Should I keep silent or should I fight back? Sri Aurobindo: no doubt, hatred and cursing are not the proper attitude. It is true also that to look upon all things and all people with a calm and clear vision, to be uninvolved and impartial in one's judgments, is a quite proper yogic attitude. So these two things so far, no problem. Even in a traditional ascetic path, they will say be uninvolved, impartial in your judgment, keep the yogic attitude, keep calm and clear vision. All fine. The question comes, what do you do then from that position? The action. So Sri Aurobindo: a condition of perfect samatha, equality, can be established in which one sees all as equal, friends and enemies included, and is not disturbed by what men do or by what happens. So one can take such a position. The question is whether this is all that is demanded from us. If so, then the general attitude will be of a neutral indifference to everything. So if you say, okay, I take an equality, friend and enemy all equal, okay, I become neutrally indifferent and that's it. That would be the consequence, if that was all. But is that all? Then Sri Aurobindo continues. But the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, that's the text which Sri Krishna instructs Arjuna on the battlefield. But the Gita, which strongly insists on a perfect and absolute samatha, equality, goes on to say, fight, destroy the adversary, conquer. So from the poise of equality, then you fight, destroy the adversary and conquer. Now see, there's a big difference here. If you didn't have the equality, you fight, destroy the adversary and conquer, it can be done on passion, it can be in a clouded state. But once you've got to equality and then you fight, you cannot fight or you are not fighting in a state of clouding. You have full clear vision, or at least as clear as can be with the equality. Already with that, your basis of fighting is different, your purpose and goal, and then as the consequence of the fighting would also be different. But still, that's not all. He says, if there is no kind of general action wanted, no loyalty to truth as against falsehood, except for one's personal sadhana, no will for the truth to conquer, then the samatha, equality, of indifference will suffice. So, there's no need for general action, you can stay with that equality and indifference. If you don't have loyalty to truth as against falsehood, you can stay in that indifference, except for your personal sadhana. No will for the truth to conquer in the world, so stay with indifference. But if you have any one of these three, you can't stay with that indifference. And the question is, what is your priority? Are these in your priority? So now Sri Aurobindo is answering this part. What about this? What about us? What is this teaching, this place, this sadhana, this yoga for? So here he says, but here there is a work to be done. So you can interpret here as the ashram space or in the sadhana space of the integral yoga in life. But here there is a work to be done, a truth to be established against which immense forces are arranged. Invisible forces which can use visible things and persons and actions for their instruments. So there's a work to be done, a truth to be established. Against this truth, there are immense forces. They are arranged. They are often invisible, but they use visible things, persons and actions through whom they act. You can't say therefore the instrument, a visible instrument, is the cause. You have to see the thing behind. And sometimes this fellow is just a drunkard or ignorant or just momentarily inflamed by passion, not realizing he is a tool for something else. So that distinction is important. And it's all working against this truth to be established. So he says, If one is among the disciples and seekers of this truth, capital T, one has to take sides for the truth, to stand against the forces that attack it and seek to stifle it. You have to take sides for the truth. You can't say, I will not take sides, I will be neutral. When it concerns this truth, for other matters you can be, it doesn't matter. You have a conflict between between a couple, they each is accusing the other of being negligent. You can say, all right, I don't take sides. There's a truth, and a capital T truth, to be realized, to be found, established on earth. It's a very big difference. To stand against the forces that attack it and seek to stifle it. So these are forces, they want to suffocate this truth and attack it. How do they do that? So we'll see that in the next 2 sessions, where I want to discuss this in some detail with examples. Arjuna wanted not to stand for either side, to refuse any action of hostility even against assailants. So this is when the Bhagavad Gita takes place, that's the poise Arjuna has taken. Krishna, what does he do? Sri Krishna, who insisted so much on samatha, equality, strongly rebuked his attitude and insisted equally on his fighting the adversary. Have samatha, he said, and seeing clearly the truth, fight. So big difference. You don't fight in the middle of a confused state. You build the equality, you see the truth clearly. And only when that clarity is established, you fight. Then the fight has a very different value. It's not done because of some beliefs, it's not done because of an ideology, it's not done by a knee-jerk reaction or emotion or even a rational construction, which might have no value of its own or which could be wrong. Seeing clearly the truth, then you fight. Therefore, Sri Aurobindo writes, therefore, to take sides with the truth and to refuse to concede anything to the falsehood that attacks, to be unflinchingly loyal and against the hostilities and the attackers, is not inconsistent with equality. So it's interesting, Sri Aurobindo does not say you should have equality and do this. He just says it's not inconsistent with equality. Why? It's a very subtle formulation. It's almost like a passive form. So he says one can have equality and you can choose to do nothing. But if you need to do something, you can do this without being inconsistent with equality. So take sides with the truth, refuse to concede anything to the falsehood that attacks, to be unflinchingly loyal and against the hostiles and the attackers is not inconsistent with equality. So you can be equal and do this. That's what he is saying you should do. It is personal and egoistic feeling that has to be thrown away. Hatred and vital ill will have to be rejected. So without hate, without egoistic feeling, you have to act. But loyalty and refusal to compromise with the assailants and the hostiles, or to dally with their ideas and demands and say, after all, we can compromise with what they ask from us, or to accept them as companions and our own people. These things have a great importance. So even when somebody comes and does the very opposite, and you say, oh, but he's my friend, he's my own people, he's also doing sadhana. No, he's not. He's actively working to destroy something which is a divine truth in manifestation. You should be able to distinguish clearly and say, no, in that case, no, you are not part. Then Sri Aurobindo continues, if the attack were a physical menace to the work and the leaders and the doers of the work, one would see this at once. So a physical menace to the work itself, or to the leaders of the work, or to the doers of the work. 3 things. A physical menace directly on these 3. Then he says one would see this at once. You have to defend. So when the ashram was attacked with in the 1960s, there was one of these Bandhs, closures, and there was a political party that physically came to attack the ashram. The mother created 3 rings, 3 layers of protection for the community, and then the last ring was ready to die if needed. These things have a great importance. If the attack were a physical menace to the work and the leaders and doers of the work, one would see this at once. But because the attack is of a subtler kind, can a passive attitude be right? It is a spiritual battle, inward and outward. So we will see next time the examples of this subtle battle. And it is in the domain of ideas. And the ideas will simply go and say, but maybe Sri Aurobindo is making up a story, maybe he is lying, or maybe he did not actually have that experience, he is just making up something. Does it even exist? Maybe it's just his imagination. That's the kind of thing in an academic space. And using Sri Aurobindo's words as if to turn around and harm him. Or taking mother's words to as if counteract Sri Aurobindo, but falsely. And that's the kind of a wordplay that is attempted to harm the work, the leaders of the work and the doers of the work, and then the work itself. It's a subtle attack. Can a passive attitude be right? It is a spiritual battle, inward and outward. So inward you make your correction, but also outward you have to act. By neutrality and compromise or even passivity, one may allow the enemy forces to pass and crush down the truth and its children. So the children of truth is the consequences which follow, but also it can have a physical representation. If you look at it from this standpoint, you will see that if the inner spiritual equality is right, the active loyalty and firm taking of sides is as right. So this is a very important correction. Just because you have inner spiritual equality does not mean that you say, now I will not take sides. That's the mistake. With that equality, you should see clearly and say, this represents a higher truth, that is contrary to that truth. I take sides with the truth. The active loyalty and firm taking of sides is as right. Unflinching loyalty to the truth. And the two cannot be incompatible. Then he ends with the letter by saying, I have of course treated it as a general question apart from all particular cases or personal questions. It is a principle of action that has to be seen in its right light and proportions. So, what does this mean for us individually? First of all, internally within us, the parts in us which align to the higher aspiration of the soul and the divine truth, and the parts in us which are contrary to it, question it or doubt it, or even attack it and refuse it. Observe this, make that correction, integrate. The tendencies and movements which you can discard, the part in which the tendency and movement takes place has to be now made to yield allegiance to this rather than that tendency. So that's the internal process, and the external process then is reflected from within into the circumstances. And there you should be able to take a firm stand, clearly state this is true, this needs to be protected. And if you have worked a little bit on the equality, it need not be perfect. But if you have worked a little bit on the equality, the perspective you will have will be sufficiently clear that even if you make a mistake, a small nudge or indeed an indication here or there or from an intuition will show you, yes, I missed that, and I'll make a correction for it. If you have a little bit of that effort of equality, trust that you will be helped by a higher guidance or an inner guidance or an external correction. And you will be able to make that adjustment because of the equality. If you're tied passionately to a position, you will not be able to make that correction. So it's very important to work on the basis of the equality and then from there move into the action. So I think we will close with this for the current affairs also. In the context of all that we have been discussing in the big picture, maybe after a few months we may take up the topic again. But in the big context that we have discussed, bring this observation of Sri Aurobindo in the picture. What is it that is helping evolution? What is it that is helping people to wake up? What is it helping that is helping to integrate humanity on a deeper level or free it from some very crude coarse identifications for a clearer, a more true identification? Or what is it in the circumstances that helps people wake up from the hypnosis not become programmed robots but more conscious individuals, etc. Look at these trends and choose to align with things which assist the correct trends. Don't make the mistake to attach to a person, object, event, or form for its own sake. See where it's going, and in this way, things become clearer. And in that clarity, you will often find mixed trends, mixed tendencies in people or even in situations. There's a part in this situation which can help for this, there's a part which can lead to that contrary result. And there you will align for the trend line which is upward and the positive evolutionary trend line to grow, and for the other to be avoided or weakened. And so much of the world situation is on that subtle balance. Tilt it a little this way, it will slide into precipice. Tilt it a little way into that way, and you might just have a sudden awakening. And your intention, your alignment, the efforts you make in shift in consciousness within you, and then in your actions, in your speech, in your sharing with others, might just help to make that extra push to the tilt for the positive outcome. But first you must have the clarity, then only you can make this. So this letter I hope will be helpful for all of us. Let's consciously align, at least in our intention, to become more conscious and make this effort to discriminate from a poise of equality, and then take a firm side and alignment with the higher truth. Where you do not know for sure, you just trust that from the poise of equality, you will be given the right insights in time. Until then, provisionally, you can simply pray, may the divine will act in this space for the best outcome. Namaste. May the Divine Mother lead our steps.